sea captain. His widow built this house.
Grey Gardens, the infamous estate in East Hampton, hides a dark, tragic secret that has captivated the world for decades. Behind the luxurious facade of the Beale family's once glamorous home lies the haunting story of Edie Beale, a woman who went from socialite royalty to living in seclusion with her eccentric mother, Big Edie. Their tragic decline, documented in the cult classic film Grey Gardens, is a complex tale of love, loss, and the crippling effects of isolation. Edie Beale's life was shaped by extraordinary promise and crushing tragedy, as she battled both her own mental health struggles and the overwhelming weight of her family's expectations. This story sheds light on a deeper, darker side of American aristocracy and the emotional toll of a life lived under a public microscope. To learn more about the mysterious life of Edie Beale and the truth behind Grey Gardens, hit the like button and dive deeper into her tragic journey. Edith "Little Edie" Bouvier Beale was born into a life of privilege, connected to one of the most iconic families in America, the Kennedy family. Her cousin was Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis, the former First Lady of the United States, and Edie herself was once poised to enter the world of high society. However, what the public didn't see beyond the eccentricity, the feathered turbans, and the wild dance routines of the documentary Grey Gardens were the true emotional and financial hardships Edie faced throughout her life. While the world became enamored with the footage of Edie and her mother, Big Edie, in their decaying mansion, the reality of Edie's life was a tragic one filled with isolation, loneliness, and the constant struggle for self-worth. The documentary, while offering the world a glimpse into their unique and somewhat bizarre lifestyle, failed to expose the darker, more painful undercurrents of Edie's life, those of familial tension, abandonment, and the heartbreaking decline of a woman who, despite the fame, was forever haunted by her circumstances. The rise and fall. The rise and fall of Edie Beale is a story of extreme contrast, one that highlights the delicate balance between fame, personal desires, and familial obligations. Born into New York's high society, Edie was a product of privilege and expectation. As a debutante, she was groomed to embody grace, sophistication, and social stature. She attended exclusive schools, mingled with the elite, and seemed destined for a life of high society events and glamorous achievements. With her striking looks and ambitious dreams, she seemed poised to follow in the footsteps of other iconic women of her time, perhaps becoming an actress or singer. Yet, despite her outward charm and beauty, Edie struggled to find her place in the world she so desperately desired. Her aspirations of fame and success never materialized. Rejected from the limelight and consistently overshadowed by her mother, Big Edie, Edie's dreams of stardom began to fade. Throughout her early adulthood, she attempted to break free from the shadow of her family, but her pursuits were often hindered by personal insecurities and a deep sense of isolation. Her life slowly began to unravel, and by her 30s, Edie was left with no choice but to return to Grey Gardens, the family estate in East Hampton. What was once a grand mansion that symbolized wealth and success became a crumbling, dilapidated shell of its former self. In this isolated haven, Edie and her mother retreated from the world, choosing seclusion over interaction with society. The luxurious lifestyle they had once enjoyed was replaced by a growing sense of poverty and neglect. The mansion's halls were overrun by a horde of cats and raccoons, and the rooms filled with decades of accumulated decay. It was a stark contrast to the life of grandeur Edie was supposed to have, and the disrepair of the house mirrored the disarray of her own life. For years, the Beales lived in this dismal condition, forgotten by society and cut off from family and friends. Despite their aristocratic background, they existed in a strange purgatory, where Edie's dreams of fame and wealth remained unfulfilled. The world outside moved on, leaving the Beales behind in a self-imposed exile. As Edie aged, she became more eccentric, often appearing in public wearing flamboyant outfits and displaying odd behavior. But fate had another twist in store. In 1973, documentary filmmakers Albert and David Maysles discovered the Beales. What began as a simple exploration of the strange duo soon became the legendary documentary Grey Gardens. The film offered an intimate, unfiltered look into the lives of Edie and her mother, showcasing their quirky personalities, their troubled relationship, and their eccentricities. The documentary turned the Beales into cultural icons, with Edie gaining newfound attention in the public eye. However, the documentary's success was bittersweet. While it brought Edie into the spotlight, it also exposed her most vulnerable moments. Edie was now a star, but her rise to fame was marked by a deep sense of sadness and isolation. The very fame she had once longed for came at the expense of her privacy and personal dignity. She was no longer the glamorous debutante she had once aspired to be, but rather a symbol of the decline of a once glorious family, trapped in a decaying mansion with only her mother and a cast of stray animals for company. Edie's life, filled with untapped potential and unrealized dreams, ultimately serves as a poignant reminder of the complexities of fame, the weight of family legacy, and the emotional toll of living in the shadows of societal expectations. Her rise to fleeting celebrity following years of obscurity showcased the tragic irony of a woman who, despite her beauty and ambitions, never truly found the fame and acceptance she so desperately sought. The complex mother-daughter relationship. The relationship between Big Edie and Little Edie at the heart of Grey Gardens is a tragic portrait of emotional dependence, manipulation, and an inescapable bond. Their lives, confined within the decaying walls of the Grey Gardens estate, reflected not only the physical deterioration of the mansion, but also the emotional decay of their relationship. This codependent bond, at once loving and suffocating, defined the course of both women's lives, particularly Edie's. Big Edie, once a vibrant socialite, had been adored by society in her younger years. She had enjoyed the privileges and attention of her status, but as time wore on, those days faded into memory. In the documentary, she spends her time reflecting on her former glory, singing along to old records and reminiscing about the days when she was at the height of her social power. While her physical appearance had aged and her emotional well-being had also taken a toll, she remained a charismatic figure, often commanding attention in her quirky, larger-than-life way. However, her nostalgia for the past overshadowed any awareness of the current circumstances. Little Edie, on the other hand, was trapped in a cycle of unfulfilled dreams and the crushing weight of her mother's expectations. Despite her beauty, intelligence, and ambition, Edie was unable to forge a life outside of her mother's shadow. She had once been part of the glamorous debutante society, but her aspirations to become an actress or singer were never realized. By the time she returned to Grey Gardens in her 30s, Edie had become her mother's caretaker, a role that she had seemingly accepted but deeply resented. The relationship between them was marked by tension, with Edie often caught in the middle of her desire for independence and the overwhelming sense of obligation to care for her aging mother. The dynamic between the two women is intensely complex. Big Edie, although affectionate, wielded an invisible power over Edie's life. She had been the dominant force in Edie's upbringing, and even as she grew older, she continued to assert control. Her influence over Edie was not just emotional, it was manipulative, creating a toxic environment where Edie found it nearly impossible to leave. Big Edie had long relinquished the traditional roles of motherhood, preferring instead to indulge in nostalgia and self-pity, while Edie was left to bear the weight of their existence in the crumbling mansion. The emotional dependency Big Edie fostered only deepened the rift between them, creating a bond that was simultaneously painful and inescapable. Little Edie, caught in this emotional web, occasionally tried to break free in small ways, using her eccentricities and outlandish fashion choices as subtle acts of rebellion. Her distinctive outfits, which became one of her signature traits, were a form of self-expression in an environment where her autonomy was severely limited. She would often perform little dances, almost as if she were trying to entertain herself, to escape the constant tension that pervaded their interactions. These small acts of defiance, however, did little to alter the overwhelming presence of her mother in her life. More often than not, the emotional friction between them would lead to heated arguments, where Edie's frustration with her situation would spill out. Yet beneath her defiance, there was a deep sadness in Edie's eyes, a palpable sense of longing for a life she could never fully embrace. What is striking in their relationship is Edie's constant attempt to please her mother, despite the emotional toll it took on her. She would seek approval from Big Edie in subtle, almost pleading ways, all while resenting the emotional cage her mother had unwittingly created for her. Edie's desire for freedom and her attempts to forge her own identity clashed with her enduring need to care for her mother, keeping her in a perpetual state of inner conflict. This tug-of-war between love and resentment defined the trajectory of Edie's life and became the tragic core of the Grey Gardens story. In the end, the Beales were both trapped in the same decaying world, physically and emotionally. Big Edie's past might have been filled with admiration and love, but she had become a relic of a bygone era, unwilling or unable to acknowledge her daughter's struggle. Little Edie, desperate to escape, remained shackled to her mother in ways that were deeply painful, yet profoundly familiar. Their relationship, with all its contradictions, encapsulates the pain of a mother-daughter bond strained by emotional neglect, dependence, and a profound sense of loss. The aftermath of Grey Gardens. After Big Edie's death in 1977, Edie Beale was left to face life alone in the decaying Grey Gardens mansion, which had long served as both her sanctuary and prison. The loss of her mother marked a bittersweet turning point in Edie's life. It was, in many ways, a relief. The toxic and emotionally draining relationship they had endured for years was finally over, and Edie no longer had to care for her aging mother, who had become increasingly difficult and dependent. However, this freedom came at a cost. Big Edie had been Edie's constant companion, and her absence left a deep void in her life. The mansion, which had once been filled with their strange, codependent energy, now felt even more hollow. Edie was left with nothing but the memory of a relationship that was both comforting and stifling. In the years following her mother's death, Edie began to make significant changes. In 1979, she made the difficult decision to sell Grey Gardens. It was a move that signified her desire for a new start, but it was also deeply tied to her attachment to the estate. Grey Gardens had been her home for most of her life, and it had witnessed the highs and lows of her existence. Despite the house's deteriorating state, it had also been a symbol of Edie's past, a place filled with nostalgia for a life that had long since faded. The sale was a necessary step toward reinvention, however, and she found a buyer who promised to preserve the home rather than demolish it. This sale allowed Edie to let go of the past, though it was a process that involved both emotional and physical separation from the life she had known. Edie moved to Manhattan, hoping that the bustling city would offer her a fresh start. Immersed in New York's social scene, she sought to reinvent herself as a glamorous figure in the city's nightlife. She became a regular in cabaret performances at places like Reno Sweeney, and despite not becoming the celebrated singer or actress she had once dreamed of, she began to experience a kind of fame that had eluded her for most of her life. Edie became a beloved figure in the city, adored by a new group of admirers who were often part of the city's vibrant gay community. She had moments of joy and recognition, relishing the attention and admiration of those who appreciated her eccentricities and unique persona. These performances allowed her to feel like the star she had always longed to be, even if the fame was more localized and fleeting than she had imagined in her youth. However, despite the new attention, Edie's happiness remained short-lived. Her mental health began to deteriorate, and old patterns of behavior resurfaced. As the years passed, she became increasingly paranoid. The death of her brothers and the passing of Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis only exacerbated her anxieties. Edie grew obsessed with the idea that there was a conspiracy against her family, which she believed was orchestrated by the Kennedys. This delusion became more consuming, and Edie's mental state worsened, causing her to retreat once more from the public eye. The fame and excitement she had briefly experienced in Manhattan could not shield her from the internal struggles she faced, and she found herself isolated once again, this time in the heart of the city that had once promised a new beginning. Edie's second act, filled with moments of notoriety and attention, was ultimately overshadowed by her deep-seated fears and unresolved trauma. While she sought a new identity in the social circles of Manhattan, the scars of her past, her troubled relationship with her mother, her thwarted dreams, and her emotional turmoil remained a constant presence, preventing her from fully embracing the life she had hoped for. The final years. As Edie Beale entered her later years, the fleeting fame brought by Grey Gardens seemed increasingly distant. The attention she had received after the documentary's release failed to provide lasting comfort or fulfillment. In an attempt to recapture the life she had always dreamed of, Edie spent time in various places like Florida, Canada, and California, searching for a sense of belonging and purpose. But her years of isolation, compounded by the grief of losing her family and the deteriorating state of her mental health, made it clear that her dreams would forever remain unfulfilled. Her loneliness deepened as time went on. In Montreal, Edie lived in a high-rise apartment that did little to bring her the cosmopolitan lifestyle she had envisioned. The unfamiliar cold and isolation of the city only intensified her sense of abandonment. Montreal, a place where she was disconnected from the social circles she once craved, became another lonely chapter in her life. Edie struggled to adjust to the unfamiliar surroundings, and her mental health continued to decline, making it even harder for her to connect with those around her. Despite the occasional letters and phone calls, Edie's isolation became more pronounced, and the connection she longed for seemed increasingly out of reach. Eventually, Edie moved to Bal Harbour, Florida, hoping that the warmer climate and proximity to friends would bring her the peace and comfort she sought. Florida offered her the opportunity to swim and reconnect with her love of the water, a pastime that had always been a source of solace. Yet, despite these small comforts, her physical health began to deteriorate, and the years continued to take a toll on her. As her mental state weakened, so did her physical well-being. Edie's struggle to reclaim the vibrancy of her younger years became a poignant part of her final chapter. By 2002, Edie passed away in her apartment in Bal Harbour. Her sudden death caught many by surprise, as she had always been diligent about staying in touch with her friends and family, sending letters and making phone calls. Her passing marked the end of a life that had been shaped by both fame and tragedy, isolation, and fleeting moments of connection. Despite her struggles, Edie seemed to have found a measure of peace in her final days, though that peace came after years of loneliness and emotional turmoil. Edie Beale's legacy endures not just as a tragic figure, but as an icon whose eccentricities, charisma, and unresolved dreams continue to captivate audiences. Her life was marked by a desire to escape the constraints of her privileged upbringing, but she found herself trapped by circumstances beyond her control. While Grey Gardens may have immortalized her image in pop culture, it only scratched the surface of the deep emotional and psychological challenges she faced. Edie's story is one of a woman who, despite the outward appearance of whimsy and eccentricity, never fully overcame the darkness that haunted her from within. Edie's life serves as a reminder of the complexities of fame, isolation, and unfulfilled dreams. She remains a fascinating figure, a tragic icon whose story resonates even today. Her unrelenting search for purpose and identity in a world that often seemed indifferent to her pain continues to draw people in, making her a lasting symbol of both beauty and sorrow. Despite the tragedy that defined much of her life, Edie Beale is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the enduring fascination with those who, though forgotten by the world, are immortalized by it in ways they could never have predicted. Thanks for watching. If you found Edie Beale's story fascinating, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. Share your thoughts on this tragic tale of fame and isolation.